Yes, I've got a panel of experts coming to join me this morning. Have y'all ever seen The View on television? Well, today I've got some people that are going to help me in doing this talk, and seriously, a panel of experts. What are we experts on, Cindy?
Mess up big time.
Learning how to mess up big time. Yeah, and I'm right there. I'm an expert on that myself, and you've heard me say a little bit about that before. I want to introduce this group that's with me. I'll start down on the end, since this is Cindy Sickler. Cindy's worked with a variety of support groups, various kinds, domestic violence. I'd say she's an expert on conflict and women's issues. She definitely is. Then Caitlin Flowers has dealt successfully with substance abuse. She really understands why we do what we do, why we use, why we keep on, and why sometimes we resist help when we need it. There's something in all of us, or at least in most of us, that doesn't want to acknowledge when we have a problem and doesn't want anybody messing with us. We'll talk about that. And then Ashley Stipe is a survivor of sexual abuse as a child. She also went through the traumatic death of a very close friend, and it all happened at about the same time. She's grown a lot and come a long, long way. She's going to be involved along with several others in our support group for survivors of sexual abuse. That's going to start this Thursday at 6:30. Is that right, Ashley? 6:30. It'll be from 6:30 to 7:30. By the way, I won't be there. This is an anonymous thing, and so you don't have to worry that you're going to show up and I'll be there asking you a bunch of personal questions or anything like that. But I hope that you'll help us get the word out. If nothing else, make sure to share that on Facebook. We have an ad about that. And when you share it, remind people that it's at 6:30 for 4 consecutive Thursday nights. I want to begin with a scripture from the book of Romans, chapter 7, that describes something I think we can all relate to. It's Paul, the apostle, writing out of his personal experience. I've not talked to many people who in one way or another can't plug into this. See for yourself what you think. Romans chapter 7, I'm going to start with verse 15. Does this sound familiar to you? I don't really understand myself. I don't understand myself. For I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. Don't raise your hand, but...
I
will. Have you ever done something you hate? Okay, you're not the first, and you're not alone. Verse 18, Paul continues, I know that nothing good lives in me, that is in my sinful nature. He doesn't say nothing is good in me. That's an important clarification. There's a lot of good even in the worst of us. The problem is that we also have this dark nature, this sin nature, and there's a lot of bad there. And that's where almost every form of evil comes from, every form of abuse, whether we're abusing ourselves, whether we're mistreating someone else, it grows out of that part in us that we wish weren't there, but it is. I want to do what is right, but I cannot. I can't. Verse 21, I've discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all my heart. See, we're not talking about some heathen rebel here. We're talking about the man that wrote over half the New Testament. And he's got this problem. and I've got this problem. Maybe somebody else does too. I don't know if it's just me and Paul or what. But
I don't think so.
He said, I love God's law with all my heart, but there's another power within me. There's another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Thank God, the answer is in Jesus Christ our Lord. What does it mean to say the answer to this problem we're talking about here is in Jesus Christ our Lord? Well, if I were to have to give one word to sum up the whole ministry of Jesus, you know what that word might be? First one that pops into mind is deliverance. Deliverance. Jesus faced the devil. Jesus faced dark powers successfully. And the Bible talks about that in the book of Luke. I want to share two passages. You're familiar with Jesus. Before he really started his ministry, he went into a desolate place, a desolate place. And there he was tempted of the devil. He did battle with the prince of darkness. He won. And through the process of conquering, there was some connection when he came out of that experience having won, having found victory. Here's what the Bible says about him. Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5, it's 4. Verse 14. Right after the experience in which he was victorious, Jesus returned to Galilee filled with the Holy Spirit's power. He preached his first sermon. And after that, he went into the towns of Galilee, went to Capernaum. Verse 18, here's what he wrote. Here's what he read. He unrolled the Isaiah scroll. The scrolls at that time weren't broken down into chapters and verses as they are now, but he knew where to look. It's what we now refer to as Isaiah 61, verse 1, and Jesus read these words. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. Good news. Any gospel that's not good news is bad news. Jesus brings good news. He sent me to proclaim that captives will be released. Now think about captives in light of what we read earlier. There's this power within me. There's this war in my mind. I want to do what is right, but I don't. He sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and the time of the Lord's favor has come. The oppressed will be set free. The time of the Lord's favor has come. When we're oppressed, when we're living in some form of defeat, any form of defeat, we're under the weight of something that we don't know how to hold up. We don't think deliverance is possible. It doesn't feel like it at the time. But what the message of Jesus is, the time has come. This is your time. And so Jesus began his ministry, and what kept happening in Jesus' ministry is he kept running into people who were described as being possessed by demons. And that's one way of describing what we're talking about today. We're talking about our demons. And I'm not accusing anybody of being devil possessed. I'm talking about dark forces, dark powers The Bible talks about spiritual wickedness in high places. We wrestle not with flesh and blood. Spiritual wickedness in high places means spiritual wickedness in powerful, influential places. And some of the worst darkness is deep within us, and it's very hard to get out. It's very hard. And so we're talking today about a variety of things. I want to give you a lot of handles, a lot of different handles to grab onto, because this does have a broad application. We're talking about addictions today. We're talking about traumatic memories. Traumatic memories. We're talking about unhealed wounds. We're talking about abuse, whether you're the abuser, the abusee, or whether you're both, neglect, rejection. We're talking about unhealed wounds, hurts that are causing you currently to hurt other people. You've heard that saying, hurt people, hurt people. The people that are most difficult in your life are not difficult and mean and nasty and sneaky because they're bubbling over with joy all the time. That's not the reason. It's because they're hurting. They've got wounds that haven't been healed, and they're tormented. They're tormented people. And one of my favorite writers often says this: unless you transform your pain, you will transmit it. And so you're looking at people here today down front, all four of us, who have at least begun the process of transforming pain, because we know if we don't transform it, if we don't allow God, if we don't work with God and allow Christ to transform it, we inevitably transmit it. We pass it on to other people. So possession, deliverance, it takes many forms. You can't talk about this without talking about alcoholism. I'm not talking here about social drinking. I don't see that as a problem, but I know that alcohol is called spirits for a reason. That's the old English word for it. It's like a lot of other substances. Things can take over. Things can get a hold of us and not let go. And then we become captive. And it can happen to good people. It can happen to people who you never would expect. You've heard it. Think about it. And when whatever it is that takes control of you, whether it's some rage you have, some resentment you have, greed can take control of you, unforgiveness, resentment can take control of you, and or some kind of substance can take control of you. And you know the word for that on the highway, DUI, driving under the influence. Well, that's true. People do drive under the influence. When they do, bad things often happen or tend to happen. You know what else there? Do you know about OUIs? OUIs mean operating under the influence. Or SUIs, speaking under the influence. BUIs, behaving under the influence. LUIs, living under the influence.
Don't think about a pickle.
Don't what?
Think about a pickle. What's the first thing you thought of? A pickle. The one thing that we don't want is to teach ourselves to don't do something, because we will do that something. We won't don't. Don't doesn't get us anywhere. So don't think about a pickle. Let's think about a pickle all day today. Let that become your obsession for the moment.
Good. Don't think about pink pigs, okay? Don't think about pink pigs, whatever you do. Get those pink pigs out of your mind. Listen, what Paul was saying is actually the more you beat yourself up over your sin, your failure, your embarrassment, that there's this tricky little voice in us that makes us think, if I will feel guilty enough, if I'll feel bad enough, if I'll feel ashamed enough, I won't ever do it again. It puts you in a pickle, won't it?
Yeah, it will get me in a pickle. Yeah. And it's that opportunity that we have to begin to take a look at how is it that in a process that I've done, worked with lots of people, it's called the Q process. And it's about quantum theory and quantum belief structures and quantum looking at things. And the idea is that we must claim our shadow side. And when we can claim our shadow side, then what we can do is we can have victory over that. But it's only in that moment that we have the victory. And the process that we get to engage in that is the willingness to see it. If we can't see it, we can't do anything. So we live out of a place of, I'm just fine. What's wrong with you? And the I'm just fine, what's wrong with you gets us caught in that cycle of we don't see how our own behavior under the influence affects those people around us.
I think that's why people start living a double life. We often fear being honest because it's not safe to express honesty to each other anymore. Say, a while back, I've been going to church and I have a job, nothing's wrong with me, but I was also struggling with addiction at the same time, and I wanted to stop, but I never felt like if I stopped, then I didn't feel normal like everybody else I think feels normal. I thought that if I said what was going on or told anybody about what was going on, that they would attack me or look at me wrong. Like, I didn't want to tell anybody here that I'm struggling and down in the darkness, and then coming here and smiling Sunday morning. So that made me split into a double life. And so I can relate with Paul. I wanted it so bad, but things would happen, people found out, and I still didn't stop. And I can understand why people's not honest. So how can I be honest to God is what would get me. I couldn't tell God what was going on, and so I didn't want him to save me, if that makes sense, because you kind of get what I'm saying? It's hard to understand, but in my addiction, I would start to pray to God for help, and when I started to stop, because in the back of my mind, I was thinking his miracle could be me getting arrested, or me losing the love of my life, or me getting my kids taken away. And, that would be something that affects me deeply, and it would probably cause me to want to change, but I didn't want to go through the pain that would get me there. So that's why I can understand, you split down the middle. You don't want to be honest with people and things. So that's just kind of what I was going for.
Bingo. Very well said. And what Kaylin is talking about is really what Paul's talking about. When Paul says, hey, I've got a problem here, the thing I don't want to do, I do. You know what he's really doing? He's acknowledging his shadow. And he's not hiding anything. He's not willing to live a double life. I mean, here he is, the leader of the Christian world, and he's publicly owning his shadow. What Caitlin said also about the fear of, there's a certain amount of fear in asking God for help, because something in us knows that God's way of helping might be pretty unpleasant for a short term. It's a quick fix is much more desirable. That's why it's easier to take a pill or take another drink and feel better temporarily. That's a whole lot easier than to really be honest and get some help and own our dark parts and deal with them. And that brings me back into the ministry of Jesus. When Jesus ran into people with demons, there were certain patterns that always seemed to show up. And one of the things is that the person, or maybe it was the dark power speaking through them, sometimes hard to tell who's who. You know, sometimes the people that are most difficult and out of their minds, mad, they want help and they don't want help. A common thing that possessed people said to Jesus is, "Don't interfere with me. Don't interfere with me." And the other thing they said was, "Don't torment me. Why have you come to torment me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Now, think about that. Why would we think that Jesus, the Prince of Peace, is going to torment us? Well, it's because the work that Jesus does in us and the circumstances that often have to fall into place and what we have to work through and walk through on our way out of a dark place, a low place, is tormenting. It's difficult. It's painful. Leave me alone. Don't interfere with me. And you see that in the story from Mark chapter 5, Jesus and a demon-possessed man. This story is found in both Luke and Mark. I want to read first a little bit from the book of Luke chapter 8, verse 26. So they arrived at the region of the Gerasenes, across the lake from Galilee. As Jesus was climbing out of the boat, a man who was possessed by demons came out to meet him. For a long time he had been homeless and naked, living in a cemetery outside the town. Why was he living outside the town? Why a cemetery? Well, he felt at home there, for one thing. He felt like his life was over. I don't know if you've ever been there. He felt like his life was over, and he was outside the town because nobody could do anything with him. He was such a problem. People that tried to deal with him, nobody could get anywhere. And everybody just thought, he is a problem that we can't solve. That wasn't entirely accurate, though, to say he was a problem. It wasn't merely that he was a problem, it's that he had a problem.
And I think that's kind of why it's gotten to the point where so many things are brushed under the rug now. Because you feel that way. Whenever I had gone through everything that I had gone through, it was brushed under the rug. I had gone to a church, and he was a deacon at a church. And after everything had came out and everything was said and done, I was told to forget about it, brush it under the rug. And he was a very loved member of the church. And I think that's why in society it's so hard to even acknowledge those things now. Because it's kind of a fluke almost. It's not talked about. It's almost like the person who was abused has become shameful to society because I don't know, it's almost like the person who was abused becomes the menace.
The person who's abused becomes a menace.
It's kind of like also the opportunity, what I refer to as the elephant under the carpet in the living room. The idea that there's a big lump there, but we all walk around it. Let's not talk about it. That it doesn't exist. Yeah. And then what you end up doing is just getting bigger nails to hold the carpet down because it gets bigger. It doesn't go away. It gets bigger on our insides. It gets deeper. It gets darker. It gets to that point where it's that we're living in the cemetery. because there's a part in us that just is it's non-existent. It's like we live in a place where the wall is there, people are out there, and we're in here, and we can't let anybody know out here what's really going on. Because if I let you won't believe me. You won't believe me. And I think so often when it's pulling a nail out and beginning to take a look at what's under there, that it's really, really important for us to acknowledge that these things happen in our world. And what can we do about it? What can we do? Where can we go? And what's the support that we're going to gain and receive as a direct result of it? I hear you. I see. I love Avatar, the movie Avatar. I see you. I see you. And I think that's what's really important in these kind of situations when it's not apparent. You know, nobody knows what goes on our insides. We all look fine. We show up on Sunday mornings. And we all get Caitlin talked about it, that smile on our face. We're all just great, you know. How you doing? Oh, great! I've just never been better. And in the meantime, both arms are jerked out of socket. We're bleeding to death, and nobody notices. And I think that happens so often because we become so afraid to talk about it. And it's important that we talk about it. And who else can we talk about it but the people who say that they love us? The people who are walking the walk of Jesus. Because for me, Jesus is all about love. In the face of love, everything else disappears. So who am I that, I love that way back, I'm dating myself, WWJD, what would Jesus do? And for me, it's walking in that place of what would it look like if I showed up as Jesus to somebody who is in pain? What would love look like? What would it be to be in that place? To be the hands and feet of God, because truly that's who we are, the hands and feet of God. And what does that look like for all of us when we live in a place of, I like to use the word delusion instead of denial, because I delude myself to a lot of different things. So I think it's important.
Delusion, I agree. I think we tell ourselves a lot of lies. Like, I was looking, after Lance mentioned this story about the man in the tombs, I started thinking about what he felt like, and I thought, you know, if I was him, I would feel alone and not wanted, and no one's wondering where I'm at or how I'm doing, and I'm in agony and darkness, but this is me, and this is who I am, and, you know, if I was to get better, if say, someone was to help me and I was to change, what am I changing for them? That's what the lie would be. If I become this person that they want me to be, then I'm not really me, and they don't love me for who I am. So that's the delusion that was in my head at the time. So I can understand where he's saying, you know, get away from me, because he's really given up. He believes that's him. That's the agony, the torment. That's just who he is, and he accepts it. I believe people do that, and it's not good to accept it. You know, that's where people need to come in and help. So.
Yeah. And this man was all alone. He couldn't fit. He was a difficult person to live with. So he's like an elephant that's pushed under the carpet, like Ashley talked about. A verse from Mark chapter 5 to tell you more. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves in the hills, howling. And listen to this next part. Howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. Cutting himself with sharp stones. Are you familiar? Have you heard the reality of people in torment, emotional torment, cutting themselves?
I know we had kind of gone over it and talked about it, and after everything that had been done to me, I met a girl who had gone through the same thing, and we became instant best friends, and it was wonderful. We had a wonderful life together. and she ended up dying in a car crash about 6 months after we had met. And after that, I couldn't take the pain of it anymore, and I ended up self-harming. And I know that me and you had kind of said that it was, in my mind, it was a release of that pain. It was a way to get rid of the bad, and it was almost in the same sense as like in olden times leeching or bloodletting or something like that. It was just a way to physically get rid of the pain, or in my mind that's how it was. So I can definitely relate to how they were feeling at that point, just because you're in such a dark place and you're so desperate to get rid of that pain, no matter the cost. And I mean, it left me with physical scars as well as mental scars. But at that point, it's you're desperate because you want to feel better at any means necessary. And so I get that.
Yeah. Well, if you've not been there, I'm hoping this will help you understand people who are, because there are more than you would think. And there is something when a person is hurting tremendously between the ears, in emotionally. There's something about, it's like there's something in me and I want to get it out, but I don't know how. I don't know where it is, and it's obviously been around for a long, long time. You see it in the demon-possessed man that Jesus dealt with, and you see it all the time in our time. One more verse about this man. Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 5, verse 6 through 8. Jesus was still some distance away. This is something I referred to earlier. Here's a good example of it. When Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him. So why would he run to meet Jesus? He wanted Jesus. He wanted help. His true self wanted help. But look what happened when he got there. He ran to Jesus. He bowed. So he's in a very humble, worshipful position, running to Jesus, falling at Jesus' feet. But then with a shriek, the shriek is a signal. Something else has kicked in here. With a shriek, he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already said to the spirit, "Come out, you evil spirit." Then Jesus demanded, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, because there are many of us inside this man." Then the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them into some distant place. There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. "Send us into those pigs," the spirits begged. "Let us enter them." So Jesus gave them permission. The evil spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the entire herd of 2,000 pigs, 2,000, plunged down the steep hillside into the lake. That's the Lake of Galilee, Sea of Galilee, and drowned in the water. Why pigs, by the way? For a Jewish person, pigs were and still are the most unclean of animals. Especially in that time and place, pigs just were four-legged vultures. They rooted around eating roots, but also bugs, worms, snakes, you name it. Pigs in the Jewish mind are the symbol of something unclean, something untouchable. Send us somewhere we belong. Because Jesus had decided, you're not staying in this man. This man belongs to me. You're not staying here. If you got to go somewhere, go there. Go into them. And that brings us to your pigs that are in your seed. I want you to already begin thinking about What are the demons that battle you, that torment you? Whatever they are, you'll only find deliverance when you decide to cooperate with Jesus. When you run to Him, bow before Him with all your mixed emotions and double personality and dark feelings. Cooperate with Jesus, and whomever Jesus is using as an instrument, as His hands and feet working. Just confess life's become unmanageable. I'm living a lie, and that can't be the way God wants me to live, because God is truth. There's a darkness in me that needs the light of God to shine in, and I want to open up and open that can and just deal with that. But there's a fear. There's a fear of that, and that's what stops us from dealing with things in us, dark things in us, dirty things in us that need to be released, because they don't get better on their own. That's a lie that time heals all wounds. Time is a factor in healing, but if you break your arm and it's a compound fracture and you just wrap it up and let it heal, something may grow back together, but it won't grow back together correctly. You're going to need some help with that. And as a friend of mine always says, the best surgeon can't do surgery on himself. Fear. I want Ashley to talk a little bit about the fear as we move toward the end here. Fear. Let me give you a quote about fear. This is from Gary Busey, and it has to do with how fear can stop us from really opening up and getting the help we need, dealing with whatever thing. Little things can become big things if we're afraid to acknowledge them. I love this. Fear is the dark room where the devil develops his negatives. Ashley, I know as a little girl, 10 years old, you had to be so afraid. What can you share about that?
I'm a small person now, so you can only imagine as a 10-year-old I was even smaller. You can yell at that. But he was probably close to about 7 foot tall, so the fear physical-wise was, of course, there, but he had a way of using what I loved against me. He knew that if he threatened to take my best friend away, which was coincidentally his adopted daughter, he knew that if he threatened to take her away, that would hurt me as a 10-year-old. He threatened to harm me and my family if I'd ever told anybody. And it was his way of drawing out, and he said it so often, and I believed it, that it instilled it in me for decades. And it wasn't until I was 23 years old, and I was 10 when it happened. I was 23 years old when it had finally, something in me had changed, and I had forced myself to break that fear. And it was not an easy time, because I was afraid of being alone. I was afraid of the unknown, past the norm. And it was me having to force myself to be by myself is what finally had broken that after 13 years of it. And the torment is what he had instilled in me, and that was his way of, even if he wasn't around, even though he was in prison, it was his way of still abusing me.
But as you grew and you got victory, you faced one fear in particular, and that it sounds like something little things can be very big and difficult when you when you see someone who is afraid of something that doesn't seem scary to you, you can bet there's a reason. There's something there you just don't know about. It's not that they're crazy. I know you took a trip that really was significant for you in facing a fear.
Yeah, one day I have family members that live in Fayetteville, and one day I was talking to my sister, and we had decided for me to take a trip up there with my kids. And I kept asking, like, going back and forth, should I ask somebody else to go with me? My husband wasn't able to go, and so finally I just forced myself, I'm just going to go by myself. Because even though I had my children there, they're kids. I wanted somebody else around to, in my mind, potentially, if needed be, protect me, in a sense. But I had just decided to go, and it was the best trip of my life. I finally let go of the fear of being alone, and I was able to enjoy the trip with my kids. And it was a remarkable changing, just a simple going to Fayetteville for a weekend was one of the most moving experiences of my life. And I ended up going on a second and third trip, and those times I went by myself without my kids, and it was one of the best choices of my life. And because I finally realized I can protect myself, I'm not a scared little girl anymore. I can mentally and physically do it. I don't need to ask somebody to go with me to go on a trip out of town. And now I love those long drives by myself. I love going to, when I get the chance, I love going to Fort Smith by myself, or Hot Spring, or wherever. You know, it's a small town, so you gotta go long distances. But it was something, you know, by forcing myself to do it, forcing myself to face my fear. You know, you force yourself to go skydiving, to face your fear of heights. Forcing myself to be alone, in every sense of the word, to letting myself be vulnerable and not worry that something bad was going to happen. Because every time before then, it was almost like my gut, like something bad's gonna happen, you know what's gonna happen, so just face the reality, it's gonna happen. And I finally realized I have to stop thinking that way, I have to stop feeling that way, that just be happy in myself. And I mean, the reality was, like I said, it was the best weekend of my life, and I couldn't have been any more thankful for myself that I allowed myself to do it after all those years of being in constant fear.
You see, the gist of what she's saying to the rest of us is, you're probably not afraid to go to Fayetteville. You probably don't have that, but that's not the point. I hope you're smarter than that. What we're saying here, what Ashley is saying is, whatever your fear is, that's what you got to face. One of my oldest and best friends is at a men's encounter weekend as we speak down in Florida. And he's there because he's there to deal with some old demons, you might say. And I talked to him on Monday, and he said, Lance, I'm dreading it. I'm looking for reasons not to go. And you know what he said? I'm afraid they're going to make me do something weird. And I said, what does weird mean? And he laughed, and he said, well, my wife tells me to stop using that word, because when I say weird, what that really means is something uncomfortable for me. Something new for me, something different that I've never done before. And I reminded him what I have to constantly remind myself of. One of my favorite athletic trainers, he'll get people to do certain exercises. They'll say, well, this just is not me. I don't do this. And he'll say, well, if being you was working, you wouldn't be here, would you? And we have to do things that we don't do. And I don't know what that is for you, but I'd love to talk with you about it and whatever that is. And the pigs that you have. As our band comes to the stage, I want Ashley to give a closing statement after I tell about these pigs. The pigs are there to represent whatever it is that you struggle with. Whatever power you are under, whatever power is controlling you, influencing you, you're operating under the influence of hate, you're operating under the influence of a grudge, a greed, a chemical, an unhealed memory, that needs to go into the pig today. And so what I'm going to do is take a pig that symbolizes the darkness that needs to come to light in me, the thing that needs to be dealt with in me, the thing that I give to Jesus to drown in the depths because only He can do this for me. That man was not going to help himself. We so tend to think that given a little more time, we'll work it out. Well, if I was going to work it out, I'd have probably done so by now, you know? Symbolized by your pig, I want to ask you during the invitation, if you've got a pig that needs drowning today, wad that pig up, drown him in this filthy horse trough that you see. It's a filthy place. It's the dark place. That's where it belongs, not in you. Ashley, I want you to give a closing statement. You've been through it. You've come out of it. And what would you say right now if you could talk to that demon, to that abuser?
I have found a quote for him that I feel like is very fitting. And it's, she's been through hell and came out an angel. You didn't break her. You don't own that kind of power. And I feel like that's the most important thing.
Satan does not own that kind of power. Darkness does not deserve to have that kind of power in any of our lives. Don't allow it.